Ed is a former U.S. Navy officer and the owner of the Rivet Group, an executive search firm serving middle market companies across the U.S. Originally from Colorado, he attended the University of Notre Dame on a naval ROTC scholarship and was commissioned as a surface warfare officer. After the Navy, he has lived in North Carolina with his wife, who's also a Navy veteran, and their 2 children. Ed is a thought leader and subject matter expert in the transition from the military to civilian life. At our meeting, he'll be representing the Veterans Bridge Home, one of the premier community veteran service organizations in the U.S. He will discuss the state of Veterans Affairs, the mission of the Veterans Bridge Home, and how leaders in the community can support the veterans in our community.
Good. Welcome, Ed. Do not have to use the podium at all. That's, oh,
I don't want to be responsible for that.
oh, that is actually mine. So, okay. Well, we've got your presentation up on the screen, so,
Alright,
and
so-
I'll be,
Thank you for the invitation today. It's great to meet you all, right? So, as she said, my name's Ed Voelsing, so I'm a former Navy officer. You want to hop on to the next one? Just a little bit about me. So I served overseas in Japan. I was stationed there, did deployments to fun places like the Arabian Gulf and around the Pacific Rim, down to Australia. I've been out of the Navy since 2000, so it's been a long time at this point. And I work a lot with veterans that are leaving the military and going into the workforce. And I've been here since 2009 when my wife got a job opportunity, and she's originally from Gastonia. So I had connected dots. I had to go to Japan to meet a nice girl from Gastonia, and that helped me. And then when I got here in 2009, I didn't really know a lot of people, didn't know a lot of people in the veteran community. So I started making connections to people. Then almost in parallel to that was the inception of Veterans Bridge Home, which I'll talk about today. But first, I wanted to kind of give you an idea of kind of where things are. So in the United States, the estimate, is anyone here a veteran other than myself?
Dave,
Army?
Yeah.
so the Navy man here.
Yeah, so that, yeah, right. It's like the pecking order. It's like Army and Navy do this, and then we get to pick on the Marines, but no one else is allowed to pick on the Marines. They're like our little brothers. Then everybody picks on the Air Force and the Space Force, right? So right now there's about 18 million living veterans in the United States. That number is declining as the Vietnam era population starts to earn their eternal reward, so to speak. And I even looked it up. World War II veterans, there's about 120,000 left from the millions that served in World War II. You can't really see this graphic. Go back one, please.
Oh, sorry.
But this graphic here, I thought was really interesting. That's the representation in Congress. It's actually starting to increase a little bit as the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans run for Congress. And in fact, Vice President-elect Vance is a former Marine. But what I thought was interesting is if you go back to like 1970, right, like something like 80% of the members of Congress had been in the military. And that's important now because there's not as many voices in Congress for veterans. So when stuff like veteran affairs bills come up, the PACT Act, which covered burn pits and other issues, there's not as many people advocating for us. And that's one of the asks that I'll have towards the end here. So, all right, you can go to the next slide. So this is North Carolina. Overall, there's about 600,000 veterans in North Carolina. How many of you know the military towns in this state?
To some extent, certainly Fayetteville. Yeah.
Fayetteville,
Mhm.
Jacksonville,
Jacksonville.
right?
Mhm.
How many of you would say Charlotte? Nobody, right? So but go on to the next
But
slide. So in Charlotte, there's over 100,000 veterans in the Charlotte metro, and it's not really a military town. It's very disconnected, or at least it was before Veterans Bridge Home came along. It's a really interesting, like I looked at tons of other demographic numbers that I'm not going to bore you with here, but it's actually pretty well dispersed between different age groups, ethnicities. But the average veteran in the United States is an African American, or in Charlotte is an African American Army veteran. And I think the average age is like 35. That's kind of the typical, but the challenge is that all the different stages of your life is the needs are going to change, whether I just got out of the Army and I'm 26 years old and I just got married and I have a kid on the way versus, I'm 67, my hearing is terrible, or whatever. So there's a lot of different challenges to different services that are required for the veteran population. We need to have connectivity and diversity of services as well. So you can go on to the next slide. Certain headwinds that veterans face, right? So the Vietnam era veterans did not have a very good reception when they returned back to the United States and integrated. But they could go down to the factory and they had a probably 3 and 4 chance of the plant manager, the personnel manager had served in the military and would be willing to give them a job based upon what they knew, right? 1% of the population is currently serving on active duty. 1% is covering 100% of the defense of this country currently. I recognize this amongst the friends that I've met. Most of us that are veterans are legacies, our parents, our uncles, our aunts. It's very rare that I find someone who's a first generation military veteran unless they themselves are an immigrant. I've met many people that, one of my friends here in town, he works for Wells Fargo. He was a Bosnian refugee. He moved here when he was 14. He was settled in Baltimore, joined the Navy, got out of the Navy, has lived in Charlotte for since then, right? So that's very typical. But the problem is with not having that direct experience, then you get into this scenario where the perceptions are dictated by the news and by Hollywood, right? I've had employers like, I don't want to hire that dude from Full Metal Jacket, the drill sergeant. I'm like, and I've had employers say, I want to hire a dude like that drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. And I'm like, none of those things exist, right? So those are some of the challenges, right? And I put on here historical amnesia. It's extremely common in the United States. Every time we enter the peace, we forget about the war and we kind of just go about our business, right? Even after World War I, a lot of the veterans were promised bonuses that they never got, and they went rioting in Washington, D.C. During the Depression, right? And it's very common that we just spent all this money on this war. Well, now we're gonna, move those swords into plowshares and forget about it. But the problem is a lot of the needs of the veterans continue, whether it's healthcare or health issues, reintegrating back into the community. One of the issues that I see a lot personally is underemployment, right? So unemployment in the veteran community is actually lower than the rest of the population, but many of the people that I work with are underemployed. Their skill set is much larger than the roles that they can get in the civilian side. And again, part of that is just not understanding their background. If that makes sense. And then one of the issues that is extremely common, and this is where y'all can help, is you get out of when you're in the military, you're part of a community, you have a tribe. When you get out, you're not really so much anymore. But if you want to move on to the next slide, okay. So one of the backbones of the veterans in the community is we tend to be the underpinnings in the community. We exceed the general population in volunteerism. We exceed the general population in running for political office. We exceed the general population in so many civic engagements and civic events. And so for us as a Charlotte community, it's really important that we be welcoming to veterans. If anything, it's just because it becomes self-serving, right? We have a stronger community overall by welcoming veterans here. If you want to move on. Thank you. This slide is a hot mess that Veterans Bridge Home supplied to me, and I kept it that way. Um, So when you're in the military, you know where you're gonna live, right? You're either gonna be in the housing or the barracks. You know where the doctor is gonna be because they're gonna tell you, you know what you're gonna do every single day. You know who you're gonna hang out with. You know where you're gonna shop. You know where your kids are gonna go to school. That is all dictated for you. When you leave the military, they say, thank you for your service. Here's an explanation of your health benefits. If you need anything else, kind of go figure it out, and they throw you out into the wilderness. And so there's all of these different services and connections, but one of the biggest issues that we find is that there's an insanely high amount of veterans that have no idea what benefits they're eligible for, what services exist for them. And so these opportunities operate in a vacuum a lot of times. And it's like a bunch of little islands. We're expecting people to swim from one to one, which is how Veterans Bridge Home came about. What I, next slide, please. So Veterans Bridge Home started, I think it was around 2010. There's a gentleman by the name of Tommy Norman. He's a Vietnam era veteran, special forces guy. He got a call from one of his buddies at the special forces group that, hey, I've got a young man who he was wounded. He's getting out of the army. He wants to move to Charlotte. He doesn't know anybody. Can you make some introductions? And that one, it started with that one guy, and then it became like 4 different families. And then Tommy recognized that there's just all of these gaps between all these different services, or duplication of efforts, right? There's 8 charities building wheelchair ramps for elderly veterans, and there's nobody that's helping people find housing, right? Or whatever. And so you can move on to the next slide. So that's kind of where Veterans Bridge Home came about. They started with those 4 families, and it was just kind of a grassroots ad hoc thing. And then they started getting some funding, and then they started breaking things down. But they figured what they provide is purpose for people in the military that have left and are transitioning that bridge to civilian life, provide connections. So one of the things that I started when I moved to Charlotte was a networking luncheon, kind of like this. We started with just a handful of people that I knew that I was like, well, let's get together once a month for lunch. And then that grew into a couple hundred people at the same time. Veterans Bridge Home came along, and that's part of it is just providing that opportunity to have community and make fun of the Army guys, right? Like, hear what's going on from someone who, the retired 2-star that just left and wants to talk about, hey, this is what we're doing in Africa or whatever. So it's a way that we can stay connected. But then also the care piece. So the 3 main program areas that Veterans Bridge Home has currently, and this is the bulk of what everything happens. One is an employer alliance, so feeding people into the jobs, because that's kind of the keystone, right? I just left the Army. I need a job. Can you help me? Okay, great. These are all of the employers that are military friendly, have dedicated veteran recruiters, have a military resource group, employee resource group. It's a good place for people to start their civilian career. They might not stay there for forever, but it's a good place to start, whether it's Lowe's or Bank of America or Duke Energy or Atrium or whoever. That camaraderie piece, right? So 100,000 veterans, there's about 10,000 that are active at some point during the year that do things, whether it's the Wednesday morning workouts, which I do not attend, whether it's the monthly luncheon, which I do attend, or happy hours or fitness events. The big one that we're doing this weekend is the parade, which is tomorrow at 11. Love to see you all there. And then they're doing a festival at Romere Garden Park after the parade. Then the other piece I want to talk through. So part of the lore of Veterans Bridge Home is this is a problem that's nationwide, right? And all these people think, well, what is the VA doing? The VA is essentially a healthcare organization. That's it. They do other things, but the bulk of their budget and their attention is on healthcare. That's it. You can get VA loans and stuff, but the VA doesn't really facilitate that. The VA is not there to make sure that, hey, are you leaving the house to go meet new people and just hang out, right? That's not really what they're gonna cover. So back in 2012, on a national basis, the University of Syracuse has their Institute for Veterans Military Families, and the Walton Foundation put some money together, and they're trying to do this better. And Veterans Bridgehome was one of 4 veteran service organizations across the country that was kind of the prototype that they launched this NC Serves network. And then when it just started, it was Charlotte, and then it became the Triad, and then it was they took over for the Triangle as well. But what the NC Serves network is, so all of these different service providers feed into this network. So if that veteran needs health assistance with finding housing, assistance with mental health, assistance with healthcare or employment, like, so they can feed people to all of these different organizations. And this is also important. They keep score, right? So if there's a mental health care provider that they're feeding people to, and they don't ever pick up the phone and they don't ever respond, they get kicked out of the network, right? So it's holding these providers accountable for taking care of the group. Veterans Bridgehome kind of triages everything. They'll do intake calls and figure out, like, what do you need? Well, I'm struggling getting my VA benefits, my GI Bill figured out. Okay, great. We got a guy at UNCC who you can sit down with and talk to, right? So they facilitate all of those connections. You can go on to the next slide. This is the numbers from 2023. You can see through 2023, the numbers of impact started with 4 in 2010. On average now it's into the 7,000s of individual people, but it's also beyond that. It's families, it's military spouses, it's, children and working through that. As I was saying before, Veterans Bridgehome keeps suffering for their success. When again, they started here, but now it's, I've got a map towards the end that'll show their strength, but very often they are working with other communities in other parts of the country as a benchmark of this is how to do things well. This is what we've learned along the way. So they're kind of training the trainers, so to speak, across the country. Go on to the next one. So this gives you an idea of their overall, and it's tough to see on the screen a little bit, but housing, employment, mental behavior health, income support. Sometimes, it's all interconnected. Sometimes I get veterans where it's, well, my disability hasn't kicked in yet. I haven't been able to find a place to live, and I can't get a job because I'm not able to work. And those dominoes start falling pretty quickly. And there's still issues with veteran homelessness and whatnot. And the other thing that I didn't put a slide together is, but you can go on to the next. The one thing that Veterans Bridgehome does is that obviously we have this very large network of smart, talented, capable people. So sometimes we get called in when things go sideways a little bit. For example, Veterans Bridgehome led a task force when Afghanistan fell during the retreat. What was that, 2022? Or 2021? So when Kabul fell and we were evacuating allies from Afghanistan, people who've been interpreters and stuff, a lot of them ended up here in Charlotte, and nothing was set up to, like, the refugee services in Charlotte are used to eaches per year, not hundreds. And so we set up a task force, all of these different community organizations to help through that process. And ironically, it was very similar to veterans. It's like, I got to find housing, I got to find a job. And so we were able to work through that. The most recent one was very recent that I can speak to is they've partnered with agencies up in Asheville that are helping out not only the homeless veteran community. There's a shelter up there that just got obliterated during the hurricane, but also working with agencies that are helping all of these other communities, church groups and everything like that. And Veterans Bridgehome sending volunteer groups up to Asheville pretty much every day for the past 6 weeks to help volunteer, sort through things, and do recovery. Right.
Okay.
All right. So how can you help? Number one thing is just be involved. Invite veterans into your tribe, whether it's the Rotary Club or it's Hey, we've got fitness classes you might want to try out or whatever. Like if you've got neighbors that you knew were in the military, be welcoming. Try to understand their story. Get past the stereotypes. Right? We're not all jumping out of airplanes with a knife between our teeth doing stuff, right? Everyone's got a different experience. I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago who signed up for the Navy because he didn't really have a lot of other choices. Became a culinary specialist, not through his own choice. That's just where he got sent. But now he's a professional chef and he's doing great, right? But it was he was like, yeah, my Navy service was, I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of led to everything else. So, all right, Veterans Bridge Home, how you can help VBH specifically. You can go on their website, just sign up for their newsletter. You can get involved in any of the events that they have. They have a very robust calendar. They're doing stuff in the Triad, they're doing stuff in the Triangle, they're doing stuff, down in Fort Mill and Rock Hill and Valentine. So there's events, some of it's just fellowship, some of it's actually service events that they do. If you need any services yourselves, gentlemen, you can reach out to them and they can connect you to the help that you need. And then, it's the VBH guys make fun of me because I used to give this speech all the time, right? It's the 3 T's: time, talent, treasure. So 1 to 3 of those things are always beneficial. But it's nice for me to say this, but Veterans Bridge Home is absolutely one of the premier veteran service organizations in the country as far as effectiveness at the mission. There's plenty of others that do great things by selling t-shirts and stuff, right? And it's only going to be more of an issue moving forward now that the veteran population is going to decrease because they're going to start knife fighting each other for attention and resources, which is dope. But I get calls all the time from veteran groups like, hey, can you support us with this? Or hey, can you help us with that? And Veterans Bridge Home gets my time, my attention, and my talents. So any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Benefit from these services, but it's not local to Charlotte. Is there another wider reach?
Where are they based?
South Carolina.
Yes, haven't connected Veterans Bridge Home anyway. They cover, they've got connections everywhere, including in the upstate, right? If it was like Missouri or something, that might be more of a stretch.
Right.
But part of it is like, one of the things that military people are really terrible at is asking for help.
Yep.
And so sometimes you have to grab their hands and drag them so they can help.
And that's a good segue to my question is, tell me a little bit more about Bridge Home's growth into other geographic areas, because it was just Charlotte in the beginning. When did that expansion start and how the logistics been handled?
If you could
go
go
back.
back that slide.
Is it 17 here? Yeah, okay.
So when that NC Serves initiative got started, they were just in the Triangle. And like the USO of North Carolina, I think, picked up the Triangle area. But this is their current footprint, including the Sand Hills where Fayetteville is. And so I think total headcount, they've got about 50 employees now. And, so they're continuously on the grind for donations and, they do a big gala, they do a luncheon lead every year, but it's, and then they get some of these big money donors from, the Duke Foundation and stuff like that. So that's always a thing. They don't, as far as I know, I don't think they get any money from the VA. Occasionally there's block grants and stuff that they're chasing, but this is all kind of a grassroots initiative. But dollar for dollar, they were spectacularly effective, which is why they keep getting, hey, can you do this geography for us? Or hey, can you consult with this outfit in upstate New York?
Excellent. David, you have a question?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, can you? Yes, currently it is, I looked it up, it's like 3.1 4, so it's about 2 or 3 percentage points lower than the average at large. It used to be like double. It used to be like 6-7%. And then when in that like 18 to 24 demographic, it was really high, like 30-40%. But it's some of the things that I've personally seen here. So like Queen's University really has a good veterans office now. To recruit students, like veterans that are going to school. When I went to school, I was in that 18 to 22 demographic, and that was fun. I can't imagine being like 26 in a, airborne ranger, and now I'm sitting with 18-year-olds going to class. But UNC Charlotte's got a pretty good veterans office as well. And it's, I think the hardest challenge, and I'm sure everyone here has figured out to do this at one point or another, is figuring out what you want to be when you grow up.
Yep.
I've had Marines, colonels, 30 years in the Marine Corps. Deer in the headlights, right? These are dudes that like recon Marines who've done crazy stuff in really dangerous parts of the world, and they're absolutely terrified of what it's going to be like as a civilian. And I've had one of the guys that I've worked with personally was the Sergeant Major of the Army. He was probably the most grounded individual I've ever met. 40 years in the Army, and he was so excited for this next chapter of life. He's been out for a year and change. He's doing amazing. So it's a journey.
Good to hear it.
All right.
Any other
Lead it back
questions?
Over to you.
Right. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much, Ed.